There are moments in life when courage rises quietly without warning. Not in grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but in the split second when someone decides they will not step back from what they love. Tonight's true story is about that kind of courage. A story that unfolded on a cold night in Chicago, in a neighborhood where danger was familiar, and where a single mother made a choice that ended up protecting the future of her entire family. In the 1970s, Chicago's West Side was a place shaped by hardship. Gunshots weren't unusual, sirens weren't surprising, and parents learned to guide their children through danger the way others might teach them to cross a busy street. Mary Thomas lived there with her 9 children. She worked multiple jobs, stretched every dollar, and fought every day to keep her family safe. She wasn't fearless, but she was determined. And every child in that small, crowded apartment knew that their mother's strength was the anchor of their world. Late one night, as most of the city slept, Mary heard something outside. Not the usual noise of the neighborhood, but a tense, concentrated silence. Whispering, footsteps, and the unmistakable click of metal against metal. She walked to the window, pulled the curtain just slightly, and saw shadows, many of them gathering on her sidewalk. What she didn't know until later was that a local gang had come for one of her sons. They wanted to force him into their group, and in that time and that place, young boys joining gangs was all too common. But Mary had spent years protecting her children from that path, and she understood the danger immediately. Once a gang decided they wanted someone, they didn't ask twice. They came to take. Through the thin apartment door, she could hear their voices now. Teenagers, but armed. 15 of them. They were spread across the front steps, the yard, the sidewalk, closing in like a net. Inside the house, her children started to cry quietly, their fear rising with every second. Mary looked at each of them. 9 young faces, wide-eyed, trusting her to do something, anything to keep them safe. She knew one thing with absolute clarity. She showed fear, they would panic. If she tried to hide, the gang would break the door. And if she waited, their family might never recover. So she didn't run and she didn't hide. Mary Thomas made a choice that only a mother could make in that moment. She stepped toward the door, placed her hand on the knob, and whispered to her children to stay behind her and not move no matter what happened. Then she opened the door. Cold air swept into the apartment. Street lights flickered against the faces of the gang members, each one armed, each one expecting an easy takeover. But instead of frightened children, they saw one woman. A woman standing tall on her porch, refusing to step back. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply walked forward, one step, then another, closing the distance between herself and the gang. 15 guns. One mother. One of the boys stepped forward. He was holding a gun low at his side. His voice wavered just enough to reveal his youth as he said, "We're taking the house. Move." In that moment, Mary made eye contact with him. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with a kind of steady, burning resolve that comes only from love. And she answered with a sentence that would later be repeated in interviews, documentaries, and even by her son himself. "If you're gonna take my kids, you're taking me too." The boys shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at each other. This was not going the way they expected. Mary stepped even closer, so close that her voice no longer needed to carry. "You better be ready to shoot," she said, because she knew they needed to feel her conviction. "Because I am." What she meant was not that she had a gun. She didn't. What she meant was that she had already made peace with whatever sacrifice might come if it meant keeping her children safe. And that kind of resolve can be more powerful than any weapon. The bravado that had carried the gang to her door began to crack. Their leader looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who was not bluffing. Someone who would not fall to threats or intimidation. Someone who loved her children enough to stand between them and danger with nothing but courage. One by one the boys began to back away. Guns lowered. Steps retreating. Whispers fading into the wind. And then, like a wave pulling back into the ocean, they were gone. Mary didn't celebrate. She didn't collapse. She simply turned around, closed the door, locked it, and leaned her forehead against the wood as her hands finally began to tremble. But when she walked back to her children, she smiled at them, because she needed them to believe that everything was going to be all right, that their world was still safe, that their mother had protected them once again. Years later, one of those children, her youngest son, would grow up to become NBA legend Isaiah Thomas. And whenever he spoke about his mother, he said the same thing, that her strength, her sacrifices, and her unshakable courage were the foundation of everything he became. The story of that night is not famous because of violence or danger. It is remembered because it shows us something universal, that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act even when fear is overwhelming. Mary Thomas did not choose that night. She did not choose the danger or the darkness. But when it came, she chose to stand. And because she stood, her children were spared, their futures were protected, and the world gained a story that continues to inspire people today. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who feel terrified and still move forward. Sometimes heroes do not wear uniforms or hold titles. Sometimes they are simply mothers who refuse to give up on their children, no matter the cost. This was the night when a mother faced 15 armed gang members alone and won. Not with violence, not with power, but with a courage shaped by love. And that, perhaps more than anything, is what makes this story unforgettable.